Welcome to our session on leadership for a strong democracy across partisan and racial divides. I'm Lynn Pasquerella, president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Aaron Thompson, council president of the Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education, and John Bridgeland, founder and executive chair of More Perfect, executive chairman of Office of American Possibilities, and former director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. There's no doubt that leadership for a strong democracy requires coalition building and partnerships for creating sustainable change. This panel represents efforts to create these types of change networks at the association level, the state level, and the national level. It's an approach that's central to AAC&U's work, catalyzed by our mission of advancing the democratic purposes of higher education by promoting equity, excellence, and innovation in liberal education. Two of AAC&U's signature programs, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, in which college and universities partner with community organizations to promote narrative change with the goal of jettisoning the belief in a hierarchy of human value. And our partnership with Interfaith America, that is promoting speaking across religious differences, demonstrate how coalition building can transform society in profound and lasting ways. I'm really eager to hear from my two panel colleagues about the work that they're doing, because they have extraordinary insights into how we can work together to achieve our shared objectives around strengthening democracy. So I'm going to turn first to Aaron and ask, how can state systems of higher education, which are so critical today, be supportive of facilitated collaboration across campuses by furthering democracy? And particularly, what can we do to move the needle on these efforts beyond just programmatic tweaks?
Thank you, Lynn. It's good to be with you. Obviously, this is an important question that we've been
Aaron,
able to...
I'm not hearing you, so...
Lynn, can you hear me? If everybody can hear me, I've been told they can hear me, Lynn. So, yeah, I mean, it's an important question for today's time. And in Kentucky, we've taken this seriously in many facets. I mean, I won't lay this out in a conceptual design that we started working on 6 years ago. One is that we have been talking about the value of higher education because you've heard so many people talk about why higher education isn't valuable. And here in Kentucky, we wanted to say, how do we show this value, if you will, and how do we convince people that we are a part of the solution and not the problem? And so we did set an attainment goal, 60% of our citizens being highly educated with a credential that matters by 2030. But we also correlated it directly with, a strong economy in the state. But the argument that we pose simply is this: how do we know that those credentials are of quality? So we started out then saying, how do we show quality, measure quality, and how do we do it in an equitable way? And so a part of what we put in place, we started working with employers who we felt would be one of the constituent groups that would determine if they want to hire our citizens or our students, and indicate then to us that we have quality in that regard. But we also knew that we had to ask the students. So several years ago, I went on a listening tour and I talked to employers and students to talk about what do we do well in higher education and what don't we do well. And they basically told us we did really well in preparing technically our students to do work, didn't do so well in preparing their students to actually have those employability skills, some people call them soft skills, when they're in the facet of working. And so what we decided to do in Kentucky is to work with employers on the front end and work with our campuses, especially to put in the thread of those campuses, those employability outcomes, not just to take a test on the end, but that we would thread those employability outcomes inside of our curriculum, inside of our majors. And we did that. And we've shown that we can do that. So in those, we decided that we wanted to have Kentucky make a bigger statement that would say that if you hire a student from Kentucky, everybody's going to know that this is a quality student with all the technical skills they need and the 10 employability skills that they need, those essential skills. Number 7 on those, you know what a few of them are without going in great detail, you know, being able to problem solve, have quantitative literacy, being able to work with people of diverse backgrounds, and so on. But number 7 is to engage in civic life to improve society. If we believe that higher education is a direct path to a strong quality of life, then we had to have civic life engaged in that part of what we train our students to do, or educate our students to do. And we go on and talk about the political elements, the democracy, all of those pieces with it. But they now have become one of the 10 essential skills, competencies that we're incorporating in our majors and in our general education. And we're building these competencies in to describe what we call the graduate profile for Kentucky. Now, the interesting piece of this, what's overlaying all of this is an equity component. We know that everybody needs to participate in this, so we're pushing this to all of our students, whether you're underrepresented, low income, adult learner, to have this as a part of their curriculum, to have our faculty and staff being educated on how to do this, and to have employers on the front end working with us to do it. What we've realized in this short time we've been doing this is that, you know, our students are telling us that they are getting those skills that helps them to engage. We're getting more internships, externships, even apprenticeships, and our employers are saying that these students are bringing with them now, yes, the technical skills, but also how to communicate with people in a variety of capacities, whether they're from the same background or different backgrounds, of the same political persuasion or not. What we knew a long time ago when we had those liberal arts skills engaged with us, that they mattered to create the whole student and the whole purpose. What we figured out is that we had to incorporate this into the fabric. And so that's what we've decided to do. So the statement that I'm making here with you now, as I've made before to others, if we think this is an important piece, and it's obviously an important piece, we have to be able to put it in place and be able to measure it to make sure that they have it. And so, and I'll end it with this, and hopefully we can come back and talk more about it. But when we were talking about achieving quantitative outputs that we need to create a thriving economy, we're going to have to make sure that we are providing them with that overall holistic set of educational skills that are needed to make that happen. That they're going to have to be able to engage in dialogues that's going to actually take us way beyond where we're at this point in time. So not just to have those majors and degrees that are predicting what we need in 5 or 10 years, but to have those skills along with those majors and degrees. So Lynn, I'll leave it there for this time, and hopefully we can come back and discuss more about it.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Bridge, tell us about the creation of the Sustainable Democracy Goals and how these might inform national efforts for collaboration among higher education campuses.
Thank you, Lynn, for all you've done for our country, and to the AAC&U and the CLDE for its extraordinary leadership on college civic learning, which is more fundamental than ever to a thriving democracy. And I want to thank my friend Aaron. I'm from Ohio. It's nice to see a neighbor from Kentucky whose experience actually in education as a pathway to a better future resonant with my own family. My dad was literally lifted out of poverty by higher education, and that experience propelled both of us into public service. I can't but help start by mentioning my own experience in civic education and higher ed, because it changed my life. My professor and thesis advisor, James Q. Wilson, had a course on American government that inspired me into literally a career in public service. And I remember to this day his closing words of his closing lecture, where he said, "Americans are good enough to make democracy possible, yet bad enough to make it necessary." And that the pursuit of happiness with a capital H, this mystical notion in the Declaration of Independence, which was unequally applied since the beginning, was not just an individual right, but a cooperative enterprise that we help one another achieve. And I think we need to engage future generations in an understanding of our democratic norms and values and institutions, and that citizen, not president, not senator, not governor, is the highest office in our land. I remember hearing a college president tell his students, "In our system, you're the boss. Now learn to act like it." So we were, I see those masks from Kenya and Africa behind you, Lynn, and I have to say we were inspired by the progress the world was making on the Sustainable Development Goals to address global poverty and health. And Aaron talked so compellingly about how listening to the customer, to the students, and putting them on pathways to a better future. I worked over the last 20 years on the High School Dropout Challenge with Colin and Alma Powell and governors across the nation. We actually featured Kentucky early on and the Pritchard Commission and all the extraordinary work. And 4.6 million more students have graduated rather than dropping out, led by African American and Latino students and low-income students. Now we're working on paths to the future. But inspired by the original Sustainable Development Goals, we formed an initiative called More Perfect, for a More Perfect Union, and remarkably attracted 12 presidential centers from President Obama to Eisenhower in their foundations that are all very active. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which issued that bipartisan report, Our Common Purpose, that lifted up the evidence of what we could do as a country. My co-chair, Melody Barnes, from the Karsh Institute at the University of Virginia, with her wonderful democracy program. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, that has such massive reach across the country, and more than 100 organizations to develop and advance 5 sustainable democracy goals, the first of which is civic learning. And so all of us are working and committed to advance these goals. At the George W. Bush Presidential Center, just to give you a little flavor of the kind of thing we're trying to pull together, we focused on SDG 4, which is free and fair elections. We announced $30 million in new commitments to advance the work on the ground in 5 battleground states, including with the Carter Center. And collaborations that were unleashed played a really positive role in the 2022 midterm elections, building confidence in elections, educating people on the checks and balances to avoid error and fraud, and getting 775 candidates, Republicans and Democrats alike, to agree to accept the election results and the peaceful transfer of power. Who could imagine that we'd have to do that? But here we are. So in this collaboration called More Perfect, we've been working closely, as you know, with the AAC&U and with Campus Compact, and now the CLDE coalition that you all helped form. And the coalition was represented by your colleague and predecessor, because you're so busy, Lynn, but we'll get you at another forum, Carol Schneider, at our event at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in October. And she shared the extraordinary research that I think Aaron touched upon, showing the multiple benefits to students from civic learning, including graduation retention, increased openness to a diversity of viewpoints and working together across differences, which of course is so critical today, and increased civic engagement and career prep. Melody and Barnes, I'll end with this. Mel and I are talking with you all, she's my co-chair in More Perfect, about organizing an action forcing event in 2023 where we could offer grants not only to showcase innovation in civic learning and higher ed, but to help foster that innovation across networks, your networks, to advance other sustainable democracy goals and national service, bridge building, free and fair elections, and access to trusted news and information. And as you well know, to reclaim higher education's civic mission, we're all going to have to break out of our silos and create new forms of collaboration, including collaborations with K-12 that Dr. Thompson is so compellingly pushing and advocating in Kentucky. So that's it for me for the moment. Back to you, Lynn.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm certainly at AAC&U. We talk all the time about the critical need for colleges and universities to serve as anchor institutions and demonstrate that their success is inextricably linked to the psychological, social, educational, health, economic well-being of those in the communities in which they're located and those they seek to serve. So thank you for those words. I want to ask both of you why coalition building and partnerships are key for supporting and sustaining commitments to equity as an imperative for the future of democratic engagement.
You know, Lynn, what a wonderful question. And it is about building partnerships. It is about building coalitions, but it's also making sure that we're keeping in place exactly the focus on the populations we need to keep focus on. And those are the students that we're serving in the world that we live in. And I want to lay out exactly the operational definition by which I take the role of partnerships. And I think we have to be really careful that we're not saying partnerships like everybody, but then you don't know what that means, right? You don't know how to really engage them. But if we can really be clear, and they may change at different times, or you may add people on or partners on at different times, but you have to know exactly what are you trying to look at and where you're trying to go. Equity has been an overriding way that we look at our entire agenda, no matter what we're doing. How do we do it with that in mind? But we have to define what equity means. And giving an example so people are on the same page, people talk about DEI, they talk about diversity and equity being the same. They're really not. And I'll give you a very quick example. Diversity is actually having aspects of all the populations around you, right? Race, gender, different ways of thinking, all kinds of things. It's an aspect of the population. Inclusion is really, and I use the analogy of a dance. Higher education, we want to invite everybody to our dance. And we want everybody to take part in. We can't leave anybody out, right? And that's diversity. Inclusion is we're asking them all to dance, that we're not willing to leave anybody out of that dance, which means strong engagement. And it's going to take multiple partners to do those sorts of engagement to help those students to be as successful as they possibly can be. Equity now is a different story. To give you an example, I know John, he can't dance nearly as well as I can. So John's going to need extra help in order to get there. And that's equity, is being able to give the inputs to the students that they need to get there. When we think about democracy and civic engagement, we have left people out. Right? And we haven't done a very good job of actually weeding everybody into it. But there's some people we've done a really good job of weeding out of it by the way that we do our business. And so equity for me in that regard is really having people opt out of it. We're including everyone in it in what we're doing in Kentucky with incorporating it into all of our curriculum. Into our pedagogical techniques, but also in the way that we're assessing people to make sure that students, no matter from what their backgrounds are getting those necessary skills that they need in order to participate. And it's going to take harder work for some of us than for others of us. And so equity is about understanding where we're at. We have a long way to come on the operational definition of civic engagement, civic democracy. I've been involved with Campus Compact, the AAC&U for a long time. And those are good. How do we take that information and partners, along with our K-12 partners, along with our employers, along with our legislators and others, to talk about how do we build a Kentucky or a society where the quality of life for me, where higher education is that, that gasoline to push it, to make sure that all of our folks have an opportunity to participate, even once they get this credential or degree, that they feel like they've been able to be prepared to do so. So equity then is making sure that we have weeded people in versus weeding them out.
Thank you. Bridge?
I love the dance of equity. And Dr. Thompson, you have much to teach us all. The dance of pluralism. Someone said to me the other day, I wonder if multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy will survive in America. I found that as sort of a stunning question. And, I want to go back again to my own civic learning. I was in high school, and my high school history teacher gave us an assignment, and I had the privilege of representing Dred Scott in a mock trial of Sanford versus Scott from 1857. And unlike that constitutional monstrosity of the 19th century under Roger Taney, I won the case, and it sort of changed my perspective on the world. I remember coming across, to your wonderful question about equity, Justice Thurgood Marshall said something to the effect, I do not honor the original Constitution because it excluded Blacks, Native Americans, women, and men without property, but I honor what the Constitution has become over time. And I think that's our continuing challenge, in an urge toward a more pluralistic society and democracy. A number of colleagues and I, who ran the White House Domestic Policy Council under different administrations, were asked to form an initiative, which we've done, called Dignity.us, to address hate-fueled violence in America and that targets various populations for who they are and what they believe. And it's just remarkable in the last 5 years how our lack of fidelity to seeing one another through a lens of common humanity is resulting in being fearful as we go out into public places. And this work on equity isn't theoretical. I formed the COVID Collaborative in 2020 to bring together top experts in health, education, and the economy. In 2020, when there wasn't a national plan for COVID response, and we saw disproportionate deaths from COVID among Native Americans, particularly in Navajo Nation, and Blacks and Latinos and other populations. So we instantly forged partnerships with the NAACP, Unidos US, the National Congress of American Indians, the Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum. And they have been at the center of, Aaron talked about the importance of listening. The first thing we did was to listen. We heard that African Americans had a historic trauma from the Tuskegee studies on Black men. And so we engaged the grandchildren of the Tuskegee men who were experimented upon to have them look at the evidence about vaccines and engage them in conveying to the nation that these vaccines were safe. So the power of listening and the power of engaging diverse populations. And our More Perfect initiative on democratic renewal and protection is including these same partners. And we want to ensure, through your networks and our collective networks, that we develop our sustainable democracy goals, as we are, including with HBCUs, HSIs, tribal colleges and universities, our 1 year and 2 year and 4 year and beyond institutions, to ensure that the civic learning inquiry is at the center, not the periphery of education, and equitable access to the kinds of education Dr. Thompson and my family had is something that's provided to all. I'll end just by saying, after 9/11, when I had this opportunity to try to work with so many leaders on civic learning and national service, Justice Kennedy and David McCullough reached out to me to remind me that civic learning is at the core of the function of every single state constitution, including the Massachusetts Constitution that preceded our federal Constitution by 10 years. And as Derek Bach, who I never knew when I was in college, he was sort of on high, but he was my college president, wrote this incredible piece, The Crisis of Civic Education and Higher Education. We clearly have more work to do. And I know earlier today, you heard from students talk about their work as change makers. And if we're going to create a more inclusive, equitable, pluralistic democracy, then every student deserves, and the country deserves, the knowledge and skills to help advance that work. So thanks for that wonderful question. And it has to be at the center of the inquiry.
Yeah, thank you. That's
Lynn, can I add one other thing? John
Yes,
just brought it to mind. I remember in 1968 seeing my parents vote for the very first time in their lives. They went to the polls, and I was a young man. I went with them, and I saw somebody try to buy their votes.
Ooh.
Very first time they had a chance to vote. That taught me some lessons about civic learning and civic engagement. And not that they're not married, they are. But I think it's more than just helping our students to understand what civics are. It's to help them to engage in it. And I think that's an important piece that I would want everybody, the listeners, to hear. It's our job in higher education to give especially students a voice, to be able to, on our campuses, offer the venue for engagement, to be able to give them the skills that they need to do both listen, learning, yes, but also in addition to engage and to understand what it means if they don't engage, how we can have people questioning the value of who they are as people and the society they live in that we purport to love. So I would hope that we're able to take all of that into a holism of what we're trying to do in this area.
I want to add Sustainable Democracy Goal 2 is civic engagement, a rite of passage through national service and volunteering, including federal work study on college campuses where I worked in a library. I didn't know under the 1964 statute there was a fundamental purpose to get students out into the community and actually marrying what they're learning in the classroom with experiences in life to civically engage. And I hope that too is sort of resurrected and re-understood. So federal work study and other efforts like that, building on what Aaron said, engages students in real experiences that reinforce what they're learning in the classroom.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Like both of you, my life was transformed through an investment on the part of the government in my education. I went to school under CETA funds, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. And the goal was to train students to give back to the community. And I was a census taker, and I worked 35 hours a week while going to college. But that commitment on the part of the government to invest in my education at a time when higher education was viewed as a public good as opposed to a private commodity changed my life and really grounded my commitment to lifelong learning. So there's no doubt that the work that we're doing is more important than ever. We're so thrilled to be partnering at AAC&U with you, Aaron, and State Systems and Bridge with the extraordinary work that you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and for all that you do every single day to strengthen democracy and to really advance AAC&U's mission. I can't imagine a better way to lead into day two than what we've just had in this conversation. We invite you to join us in exploring how educators and policy leaders can work together to support students' civic learning, equity of outcomes, and democratic renewal in tomorrow's session. So thank you all for being with us, and thank you again to my extraordinary panelists. I appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thank you.